Genesis 19:31-32. One day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." The story of Lot and his daughter is one of the most unsettling in the Bible. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's daughters took matters into their own hands, believing they were the last people on earth. Why would God allow such a shocking event to happen? Understanding this moment requires digging into their time's cultural and spiritual context. The story of Lot and his daughters is one of the most disturbing narratives in the Bible, found in Genesis 19:30-38. Before we dive into the events involving Lot and his daughters, let's set the stage. Genesis 19 describes the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, two cities so steeped in wickedness that God decided to wipe them out. Lot was the son of Haran, making him the nephew of Abram, later Abraham, a key patriarch in the Bible. Lot's story begins in Genesis 11:27-32, where we learn that his family lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a major city in ancient Mesopotamia. After Haran's death, Lot became part of Abraham's household and accompanied him on his journey to Canaan. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland and journey to an unknown land, Lot chose to go with him. This decision positioned Lot to witness God's promises and blessings firsthand upon Abraham. As they traveled together, both Abraham and Lot accumulated great wealth in the form of livestock and servants. However, their prosperity eventually led to conflict. Genesis 13:6-7 states, "Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. To resolve this, Abraham offered Lot the first choice of land. Lot chose the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, settling near Sodom, a decision that would have lasting consequences." Genesis 13:12-13. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Lot eventually moved into Sodom, a city infamous for its moral depravity. Despite its wickedness, Lot seems to have integrated into its society, even becoming a respected figure. In Genesis 19:1, he is described as sitting in the city gate, a position often associated with leadership or judgment. However, his time in Sodom exposed him and his family to the city's corrupting influences. When two angels visited Sodom to warn of its impending destruction, Lot displayed hospitality by taking them into his home. But the depravity of the city's inhabitants became evident when they surrounded Lot's house, demanding to abuse his guests. Genesis 19:4-5. As night fell, the true character of Sodom's inhabitants became evident. The men of the city, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house and demanded that he hand over his guests. In an attempt to protect his guests, Lot went out to the men and tried to reason with them. Shockingly, Lot offered his two virgin daughters to the mob instead. "See now, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." Genesis 19:8. The men of Sodom reacted with hostility to Lot's plea, accusing him of being an outsider who dared to judge them. They pressed against Lot and were about to break down the door. At this critical moment, the angels intervened. After rescuing Lot, the angels revealed their mission, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They instructed Lot to gather his family and leave the city immediately. As fire and brimstone rained down on the cities, Lot fled with his wife and daughters. However, his wife, looking back, turned into a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. Lot and his daughters escaped to a small town called Zoar, but fear drove them further into isolation, where they took refuge in a cave. Now in total isolation, Lot's daughters made a fateful decision. They believed they were the last people on earth and that it was their responsibility to preserve the human race. On consecutive nights, they got Lot drunk and slept with him. Both daughters became pregnant, and their sons, Moab and Ben-Ami, became the forefathers of the Moabites and Ammonites, nations that played significant roles in biblical history. Why did God allow this? At the heart of this story is the principle of free will. From the beginning, humanity has been given the ability to choose, even when those choices lead to sin. Lot's daughters, faced with a desperate situation, made a decision that would haunt their family history. They believed they were the last people on earth, and in their panic, they chose to take drastic measures to preserve their lineage. This wasn't the first time humans took matters into their own hands. Think back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They had everything but still chose to act against God's command. And humanity has been grappling with the consequences of free will ever since. God allows us to make our own decisions, even when those decisions have painful outcomes. He doesn't force us into righteousness, but gives us the freedom to choose our paths. To understand Lot's daughters' actions, we need to step into their world. In ancient times, family lineage wasn't just a matter of pride, it was survival. A family's name, land, and legacy were tied to their descendants. The thought of their family line ending would have been unthinkable, even shameful. Lot's daughters, isolated and believing they had no other options, acted in a way that was culturally driven, even if morally questionable. They weren't just trying to continue their family name. They thought they were ensuring the survival of humanity itself. This obsession with lineage wasn't unique to them. Throughout ancient cultures, preserving one's family was seen as a sacred duty. Practices like levirate marriage, where a man would marry his deceased brother's widow to continue the family line, highlight how important this was. Lot's daughter's decision, though extreme, was shaped by the weight of this cultural expectation. The Bible is full of stories where God works through deeply flawed individuals. Lot himself wasn't a shining moral example. He chose to live in Sodom, a city notorious for its wickedness, and he hesitated even when angels warned him to flee. Yet, despite his flaws, God saved him. His daughters too made a grave moral mistake, but their story didn't end in disgrace. Instead, their descendants, the Moabites and Ammonites, became significant players in biblical history. One of the most fascinating redemptive arcs comes from Ruth, a Moabite woman and a descendant of Lot's elder daughter. Ruth's faith and loyalty earned her a place in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This connection is a powerful reminder that God's plan often involves redeeming human failures. What begins as a tragic, morally complex situation can be woven into a greater narrative of grace and purpose. After fleeing Sodom, Lot and his daughters secluded themselves in a cave, cutting themselves off from society. This physical isolation mirrored their emotional and spiritual state. They had witnessed the destruction of their home, lost their mother and their community, and were now alone, left to navigate their future with no guidance or support. Isolation can lead to despair and distorted thinking. In their secluded environment, fear and hopelessness clouded their judgment, pushing Lot's daughters to take drastic measures. Their actions highlight a universal truth. When people are left alone in their thoughts, especially in moments of fear and uncertainty, they can make decisions they wouldn't under normal circumstances. Throughout history, isolation has often been a breeding ground for poor choices. Without the influence of a community or wise counsel, people can spiral into harmful behaviors. Lot's daughters acted in isolation, and their actions serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of staying connected, seeking guidance, and trusting in a higher plan even when circumstances seem dire. One of the most striking aspects of this story is God's silence. Unlike other biblical accounts where God speaks directly or sends clear instructions, he remains silent here. It's easy to wonder why he didn't intervene or provide guidance to Lot and his daughters in their desperate state. But God's silence isn't unusual. Throughout the Bible, there are moments when His presence feels distant, and people are left to navigate their challenges without explicit direction. These moments of silence often serve as tests of faith. They invite individuals to trust in God's overarching plan, even when His hand isn't immediately visible. In Lot's case, his family acted without seeking God's wisdom. They relied on their understanding, leading to a decision with far-reaching consequences. Yet even in their failure, God's greater plan wasn't derailed. His silence didn't mean abandonment. It was an opportunity for them to exercise faith and trust, a test they ultimately failed. Despite the unsettling nature of this story, it ultimately points to humanity's deep need for redemption. Lot and his daughters made mistakes that had significant consequences, but their actions didn't thwart God's plan. They became part of a larger redemptive narrative that culminated in the coming of Christ. This theme of redemption through brokenness is a recurring one. David, a man after God's own heart, committed adultery and murder, yet God used him to establish a royal lineage. Paul, who once persecuted Christians, became one of the greatest apostles. And in the case of Lot's daughters, their descendants played pivotal roles in biblical history, with Ruth standing out as a beacon of faith and loyalty. God's ability to bring good out of human failure is a testament to His grace and sovereignty. It's a reminder that no mistake, no matter how grave, is beyond His power to redeem. How often do we act out of fear or desperation, making decisions without seeking God's guidance? How frequently do we isolate ourselves, thinking we can handle life's challenges alone? And how do we respond when God seems silent, trusting that His plan is still at work? These questions are as relevant now as they were in Lot's time. The story reminds us of the importance of seeking counsel, staying connected to a community, and trusting in God's plan even when it's not immediately clear. It also offers hope, showing that no failure is final and that God's grace can redeem even the most complex situations.